All right, good afternoon. The Secretary General just spoke to reporters in Geneva a few minutes ago following the pledging conference on Yemen. He called today's events a considerable success. He said that $1.1 billion had been pledged at the conference, which is more than half of the amount of our $2.1 billion appeal for the year. That also includes $25 million given by the Central Emergency Relief Fund. Today's pledges, he said, are an encouraging signal that we will reach our funding target for the humanitarian aid to Yemen by the end of the year. The Secretary General said now we need to make sure that the pledges are translated into effective support for the people of Yemen. He added that we need three things: access, access, and access. Earlier, he told participants at the conference that Yemen today is experiencing a tragedy of immense proportions. The Secretary General said that only a cessation of hostilities and a political settlement can bring about a permanent end to the conflict and the suffering of the Yemeni people. He called on the parties to the conflict to engage in peace talks facilitated by his special envoy Ismail Ould Sheikh Ahmed. His remarks both at the press encounter and the speech earlier today should be online. For her part, the Deputy Secretary General is also in Geneva, where she participated in the Regional Forum on Sustainable Development for the UN Economic Commission for Europe. She also attended the high-level pledging conference on Yemen, and she will also be having meetings with heads of UN agencies and senior government officials in Geneva. She and the Secretary General will then participate in the meeting of the Chief Executive Boards, which is taking place in Switzerland. Both the Secretary General and the Deputy will be back in New York Thursday evening. Back here, the Special Representative of the Secretary General in South Sudan, David Shear, briefed the Security Council this morning. He said that since July last year, the security, economic, and humanitarian situation has worsened markedly, and that virtually no part of the country is immune from conflict. Yet he said there has been no concerted effort by any party to adhere to the ceasefire. Instead, over the past months, the conflict has only intensified. In the face of the escalation, Mr. Shear said the UN mission has increased the robustness of its protective activities with more patrols to the most conflict areas. And Mr. Shear also added that despite what appears to be an attempt by the parties to achieve victory through military means, a political solution is the only way forward. The political process is not dead, he said, but it requires significant resuscitation. To create political will for the parties to end hostilities and build peace, Mr. Shear stressed the need for the international community to speak with one voice. And our humanitarian colleagues have launched today an appeal for $64.5 million for the Kasai region of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. An estimated 1 million people have been displaced by the violence that erupted in Kasai Central since August 2016 and has rippled across neighboring provinces, leading to civilian deaths, gross humanitarian rights violation, and the disruption of livelihoods and education for thousands of children. The appeal launched today will provide water, food, health services, and basic household items, as well as protection of services to minors, women who have suffered sexual violence, and other civilians who have been victims of violence. And from Iraq, our colleagues there report that while fighting continues in Mosul, civilian displacement from the remaining Daesh-controlled areas has also continued. In the last 4 days, more than 5,500 people have fled from Tel Afar, west of Mosul, to Salje in the Zumar area, west of Tel Afar. Salje does not have basic services to host this number of people, with a particular shortage of water, shelter, and latrines. As fighting in the Mosul area continues and Tel Afar becomes increasingly unsafe, people have fled temporarily to Zumar en route to better serviced locations. The government of Iraq has also bused approximately 1,300 people from Zumar to areas south and east of Mosul and to newly accessible neighborhoods of Mosul city. Further transportation to other government of Iraq areas is expected to follow. Humanitarians continue to respond to displaced families on the move, families in displacement camps and sites, those who remain newly retaken areas, and others made highly vulnerable by the crisis. Emergency aid has to date been provided to cover the need of some 2.1 million people in Mosul and surrounding areas, with many families requiring assistance more than once. And a UN report released today in Kabul says that authorities in Afghanistan have made significant progress in their fight against corruption. The report released by the UN mission welcomes the progress and gives recommendations so that the government, with support of the international community, can build on achievements and tackle enormous challenges that still remain to end corruption in all aspects of life in the country. And in Somalia, our friends at UNICEF have begun an emergency campaign in BAIDOA to vaccinate about 30,000 children against measles. UNICEF said that many of the children being immunized from remote areas have been displaced by the drought. This year, almost 5,700 cases of suspected measles have been reported across the country, more than the total of cases for 2016. And our colleagues at WFP and ECLAC have released a study that says that the combined impact of undernutrition and overweight obesity, also known as the double burden of malnutrition, has contributed to the loss of billions of dollars for the economies of Latin America. Malnutrition, comprising both of undernourished and overweight obesity, has significant negative impact on sickness and mortality rates, educational outcomes, and productivity. It therefore carries a huge economic consequences for affected individuals, communities, and nations. And just a few moments ago here at UN headquarters, our colleagues at the UN Development Program launched a partnership with the Chinese bike-sharing platform known as OFO to raise public awareness about climate change. The partnership will provide financial support to projects that address urban environment challenges and will encourage taking actions such as biking to reduce our carbon emissions. OFO will also donate its income on the 17th of each month to help achieve the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. For its part, UNDP will advise OFO on ways to redistribute abandoned bikes to rural areas to improve education access for children living in poverty. The partnership is expected to reach about 100 million people. And today is what? It's World Malaria Day. The World Health Organization today announced a pilot program for the world's first malaria vaccines, and that those pilot programs will start in Ghana, Kenya, and Malawi in next year, in 2018. The injectable vaccine has developed to protect young children from mostly dead forms of malaria. Global efforts reduced malaria deaths by 62% between 2000 and 2015, yet approximately 429,000 people died of the disease in 2015, the majority of them being young children in Africa. And yesterday I was asked about whether or not Secretary General had received a letter from the Foreign Minister of Greece, and I can confirm that the letter has been received. And I also would want to reiterate that the Cyprus peace talks are Cypriot-owned and leader-led, facilitated by the United Nations through the Secretary General's Special Envoy, Espen Barth Eide. And as I said yesterday, the Secretary General has full confidence in the exercise of his mandate at this critical time in the talks. The Secretary General and the Special Advisor have been in frequent contact with all relevant international actors, including the European Union, as a united Cyprus will be a full member of the Union. Nizar.
Thank you, Stéphane. The newspaper in Bulgaria called the Truth published a very extensive investigation showing that Saudi Arabia is purchasing weapons from Bulgaria and shipping them to Jabhat al-Nusra in Syria, mainly to Jabhat al-Nusra. More than 2/3 go to them, as the caches in eastern Aleppo have shown. The authorities there are investigating these allegations. Where does the United Nations stand regarding that?
I haven't seen the report. I have no way to verify its content. What is clear is that Syria doesn't need any more weapons. It needs a redoubling of the efforts to bring people to the political process and to find a solution, and we need to have increased access on the humanitarian front, as we talk about almost every day here. That has been lacking. But again, I have no way of knowing whether that report is true or false.
Well, will the United Nations, for example, get in touch with the authorities there to see where, especially that there is a violation to the many resolutions regarding support of terrorism here?
I'll take a look at the report. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Stéphane. I'd like to ask you two questions about recent developments in Iraq. The Turkish military jets targeted PKK fighters in Sinjar and Qandil area, killed a number of them. Also by mistake, they killed 5 Iraqi Peshmergas. What is your comment about this? And my second question about this is, what is the UN position about the presence of PKK inside the Iraqi territory?
I haven't seen the details of what's going on there. What is clear for us is that I think any increase in violence is a concern, but we'll take a look a little more closely about what exactly happened. Oleg.
Thanks, Stéphane. Can we have an update on the activities of Ismail Sheikh Ahmed? Because while gathering money for humanitarian aid is good, there also should be some political
He's
process.
currently in Geneva with the Secretary General. He's continuing his contacts in the region and more widely. And I think when he has something to announce, he will emerge and he will announce it.
And also on Feldman, who is in Moscow, do you have any idea what meetings does he have over there? What is he discussing?
No, I'll try to get you something. Mr. Lee. That's a new way of income. There you go. There we go. All right, go ahead.
Okay, I wanted to ask you, it's reported that the UN's top official in Tanzania has been expelled. Mr. Awad Dabo has been PNG'd by the government. I wanted to know if you have any comment, if the person who's the head UNDP official is also the resident coordinator, and what you intend to do.
I don't believe she is actually the resident coordinator. I can confirm that she has left Tanzania. We're in contact with the government of Tanzania on the matter, and our colleagues at UNDP continue to work closely with the government on all issues.
Relatedly, I guess, because my question, the reason I was assuming she was the resident coordinator is I thought that currently anyone that's a resident coordinator in a country even shifts over to work for UNDP, that's the structure of how. I know that it happened in Kenya, for example. The Kenyan resident coordinator worked for another agency, UNFPA, and became a UNDP official in order to become resident coordinator. Isn't that the current structure?
I'm not sure that her title was resident coordinator. I don't know what exactly her function was in the country office, so I don't know if she was the country director or the resident coordinator.
And just on this resident coordinator issue, I'd asked you before for a readout of what Amina Mohammed had said to G77. I haven't gotten it yet, but I have spoken to some in G77 who said there's no written proposal yet by the Secretariat, that it's waiting until June, and some of them expressed concerns about it, saying this would involve a politicization of functions if it comes back.
I think there's discussion going on. The Secretary General has made no secret of his wish to reform the development system. Obviously, the resident coordinator post is part of that system. There will be some clarity and somewhat unveiled in June, with more concrete proposals later in the year. What I do know is that our colleagues in the Executive Office Secretary General always have their door open for any representatives from the G77 plus China or any other group who have concerns.
But just finally, several of them said that they believe that the person named to head UNDP, Akam Steiner, was basically either a condition or part of the selection process was to agree to the loss, which is basically it's a loss of powers for UNDP.
Well, I think
is that his position?
No, first of all, I'm not aware of any conditions being put forward, and I think everyone is speculating or projecting on what the outcome of this process will be.
More transparency would benefit the process.
Abdel Hamid.
Thank you, Stéphane. The Palestinians' hunger strike enters its 9th day now. Some of the hunger strikers are in bad health conditions now. And still, there is no statement from the SG or his special envoy on this particular development. Over 1,000 Palestinians are now declaring the hunger strike. Is there any position vis-a-vis this?
I think, if I'm not mistaken, Mr. Mladenov, I think addressed this in part in his briefing, and is something that we're continuing to follow closely. Oleg.
Stéphane, on Ukraine, the authorities in Kiev, they cut off the power to millions of people in the eastern part of the country. Before that, you remember the UN called for resume of social benefits and pensions. So now it came to this. Do you have any reaction to that? Would you call?
I think it's important that the civilian population that is trapped in the fighting not be made to suffer more. Mr. Lee.
Sure. I wanted to ask you, in Burundi, a gentleman named Oscar Natasano, who was running a set of buildings that the UN has used and was being renovated for him, has been abducted, and some people believe that he's dead. He was abducted, and a car of his was found with a dead body in it. So I'm wondering, does the UN, and people there are saying this is a person that was basically maybe targeted because he was seeking to rent his property to the UN. What's the UN's response?
I don't know. I've not heard of this gentleman. I can see if I find out anything.
And also, I mean, in terms of not hearing things, I wanted to know whether
That's my specialty.
Yeah, whether the D2 head of office for the UN in Burundi has, my understanding is that it's been 6 months that she's tried to get into the country, but I'm wondering what, from the top levels of has the 38th floor, has anyone tried to speak to the country to actually get this being paid D2 head of office in Burundi into the country, or is this a de facto persona non grata?
If you send me the name, I can check on the status.
This person who used to work in Capital Master Plan.
You could
Vivian.
Yeah,
I think you know her name.
And Oleg, to your question, Jeff Feltman is indeed in Moscow to take part in the 6th Moscow Conference on International Security. He will deliver a message on behalf of the Secretary General, hold a number of bilateral meetings, and will release the message once he has delivered it on behalf of the Secretary General. Matthew.
Sure. I wanted to ask, in Cameroon, a journalist, Ahmed Abba, was yesterday sentenced to 10 years in jail for reporting on the Boko Haram conflict. And many press freedom groups have expressed concern. I'm wondering, does the UN have any concern? And I guess I'm just asking you again, who is the resident coordinator in the country?
Right. As soon as the resident coordinator has been named, that person will announce it, and there'll obviously be a press release. As I said before, the UNICEF representative is the acting resident coordinator.
Right. And so, are you aware of this case of the person?
I've heard the case. I think
years?
Any sentencing of journalists, I think, is something that is of concern to us, and we have to make sure that it is not done in reprisals for anything that person may have said or written.
And on the Jeffrey Sachs thing, yesterday you said you'd look into it. I'm staring. I mean, it's been published. It's an open letter that he wrote saying that this candidate Doe should get the job. Have you seen it? Have you used your Google machine to see?
I have used a Google machine.
Okay.
I love the Google machine.
Now that yesterday you said you wouldn't say if it's appropriate or not because you hadn't seen it.
No, I don't
now
think.
That you have, is it appropriate?
I don't think UN officials should endorse other UN officials.
So what's going to be done?
Abdelhamid.
Back to the same issue, Stéphane. I am aware that Mladinov mentioned the prisoners in one line in a report that it was not focused on the question of Palestine, but rather he was summoned to talk about Yemen, Libya, Iraq, and the general issues.
He wasn't summoned. It was a schedule, as there is monthly, a briefing on the Middle East. So that's not the word I would use. But
what happened,
anyway,
and the pressure is placed on him. That is a development of such magnitude, of having 1,000 in a hunger strike for the 9th day, and it doesn't draw the attention of the special envoy.
I think it does draw the attention of the special envoy, and obviously, as in any of these situations, we're concerned for the health of the hunger strikers.
On another development, Stéphane, 2 children, a young boy, his name is Muhammad Musa, and his sister Muna, in the village of Sur Bahir, were ran over by 2 settlers on Sunday evening. Are you aware of this?
No, but I will check. Thank you.
Can I ask you one thing about the CEV?
No.